Parish, Port Harbor Terminal District. Machine is open for roll call, please. Eight members present. Mr. Black is absent at the time he's come in, but he's not here yet. Okay, Barbara. Y'all have an agenda ready? Let's go with the budget. Okay. Follow the agenda.
Okay. All right.
Budget message.
Yes, sir. I'm Sandy Sanders, Executive Director of Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District. All of our board members have received a proposed 2020 budget table of contents. The booklet. I'm going to review the table of contents with you and also read aloud the budget message. If you open your packet up, first sleeve, we'll lead off with the budget message. Also in the book, a budget summary, a detail of revenues and expenditures, 5-year capital improvement, manpower table, supplemental information, long-term debt summary, and adoption ordinances. And my budget message dated 24 October 2019. Port Commissioners, as Executive Director of the Port, I herewith submit to the Plaquemines Port Commissioners the proposed operating budget for the year 2020 and the proposed capital improvement budget for the years 2020 through 24. The budget serves as a financial tool to track the accuracy of last year's forecast and to game plan next year's financial roadmap as the Port steadily implements the Port's strategic plan. As required by Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District budget policy and the Local Government Budget Act, I present a budget evidencing a complete fiscal plan which contains the following: budget message, general budget summary, detailed estimates of revenues, detailed estimates of expenditures, 5-year capital improvement plan, manpower tables, delinquent taxes, current and projected retirement fund obligations, statement of indebtedness, and adoption ordinances. As required by law, this is a balanced budget. The total estimated revenues exceed the total proposed expenditures. This budget maintains services to the Port at the current level. It includes financing for all filled and vacant positions, and the majority of vacant positions on the current manpower table. Also included is funding for merit increases for classified employees and cost of living increases for unclassed employees when and where applicable. The Port uses the accrual basis of accounting under which revenues are recorded when earned and expenses are recorded when the liability is incurred. The budget basis of accounting does not materially differ from the financial reporting. The proposed budget presents a fiscally sound approach to Port finances. The Port will strive to provide efficiency and continue to promote fiscal responsibility. The 2019 fiscal year marks another steady financial pace of the Port. The Port expects 2020 fiscal year to be a continued success. Revenues and expenses highlight consistency of the Port's vision to be a global gateway to Mid-America. With the announcement of Venture Global receiving their FERC approval for the development of Plaquemines LNG facility, we anticipate construction and FID is imminent. Port infrastructure will become more paramount as construction of Venture Global and other Port tenants facilities commence in 2020. Please contact my office with any questions regarding the budget. Sincerely, Menard J. Sanders. Prior to turning this over to Sean Burrell Riley, our CFO, I would like to highlight that this year we anticipate and thus are budgeting a 10% increase in revenues, a 1% increase in expenses, and our net position, which is at $66.4 million. I've asked Shambrell to hit the wave tops and specifically address any increase or decrease of $20K from the previous year and why. Obviously, everything in the book is subject to your questions and explanation. At this time, I would like to introduce Ms. Shambrell Riley.
Good afternoon.
Excuse me.
Yes,
Let us know where you are in the book or where you're headed in the book so we can follow you according to the tabs.
I will. I'll give a brief overview of my agenda and how I plan to go over it. We will start in the detailed section of the budget. As Mr. Sanders said, I'll hit the major changes, about $20,000, whether they were increases or decreases. We can go through that. I have provided a folder with some proposed amendments, so there will be a few changes made to the details that we're going to go over. I'll make note of those line items that we plan on, or that we have proposed an amendment to, and it's subject to the board if you guys want to wait and make any discussions after the full overview as we go through it, whichever way you guys are comfortable with it, but I have provided proposed amendments with supporting details behind them. And if there's no objections, we'll start with the details.
Any objections to the table? So be it. Let's move on.
Okay, so we're going to start on the detailed revenues and expenditures tab. And again, I'll only be hitting the major changes. If you have any questions about those that I don't go over, just let me know and we can take time to discuss those. So in the revenue section, yes. In the revenue section, there was an increase of $168,000 in interest general that will be generated from a proposed agreement we have with our bank at this time. They will be paying the port now actual interest revenue on our funds that we have in the bank. So previously, we didn't earn actual cash. We earned what they call an earnings credit, and it kind of covered the cost of all of our banking services online, et cetera, things like that. So now we're actually going to be earning some actual cash on those. If you go down a few lines, there's a rent and leases pilot, and there was a change for $126,943. That line item will be amended. That figure was put in, it was put in place based on the 2018 tax roll. And I recently received some correspondence from Ms. Hazel regarding the 2019 tax roll. I'm sorry, let me back up a moment. The rents and revenue pilot is revenue that is generated from our current PLT lease that we have in place. And this revenue is calculated based on the current tax roll that's in place and based on the assessed value of the property. So yes, okay, and pilot is to define pilot. It's a payment in lieu of taxes. It's implemented in the current lease with PLT. It's calculated based on the current tax roll that the parish has adopted. I work with Ms. Hazel on getting this figure because the property is placed in the port's name, so it does not get a tax bill issued because we are a government agency. So I have to work with Ms. Hazel and get that figure to get the calculated amount. We proposed it to 126, but it actually came in a little bit above that. I think it's roughly 132,000. So I do have an amendment in your folders to increase that to 132,000. And this will also be moved to a different department. We're going to put it in the finance administration department, and we can discuss that when we get to that section of the budget. That was all of our major changes on the general revenues, if y'all have any questions.
Roussel?
Yes, Ms. Riley. The arrangement that we have with the bank on the $168,000 increase of interest earned, does that require a commitment of tying up funds for any length of period?
No, sir. And we have a policy in place with all of our contracts that one of the requirements for our contract is to have 30-day termination language placed in it. So we will have that to where if we would want to terminate this agreement with the bank, all we have to do is give a 30-day notice.
And a second question is there a revenue summary to show one page of all revenues and rather than going by department?
I do not have that in this book, but I can provide it to you if you would like to see that.
I think it would be advantageous to all the members to have a revenue summary in the booklet.
Okay.
Be able to,
I can put that in the original because I will issue another book which will include all of the changes we discussed today. So I'll add that revenue summary and expenditure summary to the book as well.
and one more question. Where is the advance rents from VG? Are they in this booklet at all?
The advance rents from VG does not appear in this book. The budget is revenues and expenditures. So in accounting, revenues is not the same as cash. Revenues are are funding that you actually earn. Advance rent payments from Venture Global has not been earned. It's exactly the title. It's an advance payment. So we have not technically by law earn those funds. They do appear on our financial statements. They appear under the cash section saying that, hey, we have these funds in the bank. But they are actually, by definition, a liability to the port. Because if we are to spend that money and not have earned that money, technically earned it, you will be liable to pay it back. So it is listed on the financial statements as a liability. It cannot go into the budget books because you have not earned the funds.
And how much of that do we have in an account?
We have 10 million.
Listening to you give that presentation, it sounds like the Cormier presentation when he was objecting to us recognizing that rent years ago.
I mean, it's in the financial statements. I really can't change the law, the accounting law, but it's not a revenue. It will not be a revenue until the port enters into a ground lease and begin to earn that money.
Yeah, I agree with that. It just was refreshing my memory about hearing that argument before.
Okay.
You want to move to the amendment?
You want to talk about the amendment?
You want to move to it and get it over with?
We can do that.
Yeah, let's do that. Amendment is, I think, in your packet.
Yeah, I don't know how she's going to do that. So in the packet, it should be the second to last amendment. There's an amendment, it says Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District, 445, Plaquemines Port Harbor Terminal District, 515, Financial Administration, 2500, General Finance.
I'll offer with those changes. Second?
Second.
Second, Councilman Newberry. Questions from the table? Scene is open.
Council members Gouy and Arbro.
Passes 8-0. Next, please.
Okay, right behind the amendment for the 132 and the decrease to the other pilot revenue sharing, there is another amendment right behind it, and that's for the Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District 000 revenues, 0000 revenues, and that is decreasing that line item to 0. And basically what that does is it takes the 126 out of our revenue budget and places it into the financial administration budget.
Offer. Second.
I'm trying to catch up here.
Okay, the same page, the same thing you did.
On the same page, asset
Second page.
reclassification?
No, sir, not the asset reclassification. I'm sorry. It's in the pilot packet, and there's 2 amendments.
Second page.
I'll find it. Just give me a minute.
At the top, it's the department revenues.
Got an offer?
Second.
Second by Ms. Newberry. All right. Anybody have questions at the table? Scene is open. Passes 8-0. Next, please.
Okay, page 2 of the detail section. The top portion, as you can see, is revenues, and it lists out the tariff revenues, the security and harbor, security cargo fees, anchoring fees, docking fees, supplemental, and minimum. I will go over those in a summary. There was a slight increase of about 1.96%. That's mainly due to CPI adjustments and a small increase to security fees that were effective October 2019. Are there any questions on the tariff fees?
Any questions from the table? Anybody? Questions? Next.
Next. Okay, our next section is the personal services expense section for the general department. Salaries, there was no major changes over 20,000. There will be an amendment to the salaries and wages, which is the first line in that section. So as you all know, a few weeks ago, there was an ordinance adopted to reallocate the comptroller to the director of finance position effective January 1st, 2020. At the civil service meeting that followed the port board meeting that adopted that ordinance, the Civil Service Commission voted to not reallocate, but to advertise and accept applications for the Director of Administration's position. I'm sorry, the Director of Finance position. The amendment that we have provided to you in your packet will cover just that change. In the proposed budget, which this 905 figure consists of, did not include, or it did not reflect those actions to advertise for a director of finance position. It reflected the activity to reallocate. So this amendment will cover the decision that the Civil Service Board has made. This amendment will place the comptroller position back into the manpower structure, and it will also provide the funding for the Director of Finance position for that to be filled as well.
Questions, Mr. Roussel?
So the effect of this amendment is that we will have both positions funded, unlike the presentation of the budget where only one position was funded.
Correct.
So is it the intention to fill both positions?
I don't think it was the intention, because we initially requested a reallocation to only have one, but based on civil service decision to advertise, they placed two of them basically on the manpower structure.
Well, the original budget that was presented had the position of
Director of Finance.
and it also had the individual's name in it with the new salary.
Correct, because that's what was adopted by the board.
Well, the clarification needs to be made that this is a civil service position.
Yes.
So when I got the budget, I looked at the budget and I saw the position being funded in there with the name of the person in there without getting personal. And it was a surprise to me to see that the name was submitted with the new salary in that budget, not having been advertised yet. And then the civil service puts out the advertisement a couple of days ago. So I don't know, why that was distributed like that, because it should have been distributed with just as it's being amended now, basically.
Mm-hmm.
However, it was my question from the beginning whether or not we were going to fill both positions, and I understand that you're going to come back now then with an ordinance to take that money out of the controller position at the next meeting, or after this year, or after they fill the position?
If the position is filled by the comptroller. Because if you advertise, you aren't guaranteed that the position is filled, as you voted as a reallocation.
But
That's why the name was placed, because it was voted by the board. The board agreed that it would be that person in that position.
Well, I don't know that that's what was agreed upon. I thought that we were creating a position, but, I mean, obviously, the sentiment expressed at the table was that it was going to be that person.
In the ordinance read to reallocate, to create and reallocate comptroller to director of finance.
And that was what the Civil Service Board had voted down?
Well, the board voted to take that action. Civil Service voted to not, they created the position, they agreed to create the position, and they voted to, they agreed to create the director of finance position, but they did not agree to reallocate. They agreed to advertise, which places two positions, the comptroller and the director of finance, on the port's manpower structure.
So it's a vacant position now?
Well, the director of finance is technically vacant until January 1st, correct?
Well, until the Civil Service advertises, submits the qualified candidates, and a selection is made, is my understanding. And look, I understand what y'all are trying to do, and I understand the intent was to just move from one position to the other position, but because Civil Service didn't reallocate, we have to go through an advertising process. When I got the booklet and saw that the name was in there and the controller position was not in there, then I was wondering how that was going to affect the future budget. So, having said all of that without going any further, my last question is, if the promotion is made or the selection is made for the controller to move into that position, then are you going to come back with an ordinance to unfund the comptroller position? If that decision is made to hire somebody else, then we'll have another another position in the finance department, which to me is overstaffing the finance department.
That process is correct, based on if another applicant was to fill that position.
So legally, we can't remove that position. It has to go through proper channels, is what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is that if we would unfund the position right now, then she couldn't get paid for that position next year.
At January 1st, correct. And the intent is to defund the comptroller position in the event that that position is filled.
Okay.
Any other comments? Okay, you want to move with the amendment? Okay, I'm
One more
sorry.
question.
Ms. Newberry?
So both of those salaries are in the revised budget, is what you're saying?
Correct.
So if it gets defunded, it's just going to be a possible a possible position for someone else in the future? I mean, that's going to be like over the budget? That the budget, that money's going to stay in the budget, is that correct?
Unless we pass an amendment, an additional amendment to defund it.
Is that the intent of the director, to defund that if the other position is picked up?
Right. We don't have any right now to fill both positions. If the need came for another person, we'd have to go through the same process, come to the board.
All right. Anybody else? All right, who did the amendment, please?
sorry. The amendment is for 445 Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District 490, Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District 2460, General Department 510.005, salaries and wages regular, an increase of $75,000.
I offer the second.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Newberry. Any more comments from the table? Machine is open. Passes 9-0. Let the record reflect that Councilman Black is in his seat. Next item, please.
That concludes the the personal services section. If there are no questions, we can move on to the financial and related services, which is still on page 2. It's the bottom section. It starts with group insurance, health. There was a change in a budget increase of more than $20,000 for the group health insurance. It came in right at about $27,611, and that covers the health insurance for all of the port employees. I think, was that percentage about a 3% increase on premiums? If you go down a couple of lines, we have a decrease in the interagency service charge. That's 576,005 of 207,543. That kind of goes hand in hand with the next line item. We can talk about them together, I'm sure. The decrease of 550,000 for the interagency fire and ambulance. The port has worked with the Plaquemines Parish government. We've met with them, as we have done since 2007, when the interagency fees first began between the two agencies. We have met with them. We have discussed with them the different services and activities that have been provided to the port. Based on that, we do have an amendment proposed for the first line item, which is the interagency service charge. We are proposing to increase that amount to $131,000. In the packet that I have provided you all for that amendment, behind that amendment, I've provided the 2017 breakdown for interagency fees, which came in at about $206,000. In 2017, the port paid the Plaquemines Parish government for services provided an amount of $206,000, and those amounts are broken down in percentages or provided behind that amendment. I also provided the 2018 breakdown of interagency fees that were paid to the Plaquemines Parish government. In 2018, that amount came in at $848,725.74. So in 2017, we paid $206. In 2018, we paid $848. In 2019, the budget was also placed for interagency fees at the amount of $861. So for 2020, we are proposing an interagency expense of $131,000, which is more on the lines of the 2017's interagency fee, and those details are also provided how the $131,000 was calculated. And if you like, I can go over those details as to how the port calculated the $131,000. And that is, it's budgeted at 15% of the 911 services budget, 8% of the civil service budget, 15% of the council secretary budget, and 3% of the telecommunications budget. The port did not budget interagency fees for the fire and ambulance interagency fee due to a current CEA that we have in place with Plaquemines Parish government. I have also provided a copy of that CEA to you behind this amendment as well. In 2013, the Plaquemines Parish government and the Plaquemines Port entered into a CEA, and it basically stated that in all emergency situations, each agency would cover its own cost. And we feel that fire and ambulance would fall under emergencies. So we have reduced that budget to zero for 2020.
Yeah.
So the question, have you paid any of the 2019 intergovernmental service charges to date?
We have not, we did not pay we were holding off on paying the 2019 pending the litigation. We do have the invoices, we have received them, we do have intentions on paying the 2019 interagency fee. We have requested and did adjustments to the invoices, just as I explained regarding what charges the port feels it's liable to and what's not being violated by the CEA.
So I have copies of the 3 quarters here for you, to present to you. I would ask my colleagues that to support the effort to have the port pay what was budgeted in the port budget for 2019, which is also budgeted in our budget as a revenue for 2019. And as far as moving forward, I would expect that the port would comply with the budgeting effort on both sides to be able to pay the amount. We have budgeted approximately $866,000 for 2020, and I would expect you to produce an amendment to cover that at this time.
Okay, I would like to state that I hear you and your request for the amendment. We, in last year's audit, we were also received a comment on not having a CEA in place for such a large amount of transfers of funds. The state has best practices and laws in place for donations, and where there's not really any written agreement explaining the public benefit. I understand, Mr. Roussel, you're asking that we comply to what was budgeted. We are put in a hard place when we have to choose on what ordinances or what laws and legislations to comply with. There is a CEA that was adopted by 2 legislations, one on the port side and one on the parish side. I've provided those behind the amendment as well. So today, I just want to make it clear that I have to basically choose whether I'm going to comply with the budget or comply with the previous legislation. That's just where we are and how we're in a hard place. I just want to make that clear on why the port feels the way about the interagency fees and not paying them, because there is current legislation in place that basically says we should not be paying these amounts.
Well, all I'm going to do is refer to the court case. We will have some healthy discussion in the executive session on that for Thursday. And I think that if you have an issue with the court case and what the judges ruled, then we'll have issues until we resolve them, which means that if you refuse to comply with the government's wishes, I will consider it as insubordination, and we can go from that. However, if you are resting on that cooperative endeavor agreement, I would urge my colleagues to rescind that, since it's outdated and doesn't comply with the court order. Now, you can have it whatever way you want, but I am done with this we, they, and us argument about what you feel you have to interpret. As the sole governing authority of the port, the will of the port has been expressed. The court has reinforced that position, and I would appreciate it if you guys would get on board with that at this point, moving forward. If not, then I think there will be consequences.
And Mr. Russo, I agree with you. I don't think that the port, and I know for myself as the accountant and the person responsible for processing invoices, issuing checks, and all of those things. And I would urge that, and I agree with you that this issue needs to be cleared up. And I just want everyone to understand that there are multiple issues or multiple documents that's in place that's saying A, B, C, and D. It's 3 different things. And, you have a wish and the previous administration has a wish. The CEA, you say it's outdated. It doesn't have a time limit on it. I searched for the law that says when it would expire, and that's why we're expressing this. But yes, if the CEA isn't needed, rescind the CEA and put the proper documentation in place to cover this administration for transferring such funds.
So did you pay it last year?
I did pay it last year, and we expressed the same exact feelings last year that we're expressing today on record.
So I would appreciate you paying it this year, and you can express those same considerations as you just did. And if you want us to rescind the CEA, we'll be glad to do that. However, you have paid it in the past with the same CEA in place, and here we are at a crossroads again, and I think it's time to get it fixed, move on. Court case is over. I would expect that you can prepare us an ordinance to rescind that CEA for introduction at tomorrow's meeting, and we can move forward from there. In the meantime, I would expect you to pay the government what was budgeted and what has been expensed under the same conditions that you paid it last year.
We will prepare that ordinance, and I think that you are right. The port has let their stance be known, but you guys are the board, and so it'll be paid.
Thank you.
Sure. The $0 allocated for emergency services it's a little troubling. I don't think we need to go round and round. But, the very nature of emergency services, they're there when you need them, and it costs money to maintain all those vehicles and those personnel and those types of things. And paying for them after the fact, that starts almost a slippery slope. I would hate to have to negotiate with the firefighters if my house is about to burn down or just burned down or in the process of burning down. I want to point out the second page of the CA, number 1, when we were trying to get some port boats down to Port Eads in the past, this says that the port may provide assets, equipment, resources, personnel, if available, in connection with the security and protection of life and property in areas within the jurisdiction of the Port of Plaquemines Parish. So I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. There might be some good things in here that we could keep. Thank you.
And there is no reimbursement to the port for those services at the time. The port, Mr. Durr can elaborate on the number of assets, trips that the port provides to the Plaquemine Parish government when in need, and the port is not reimbursed for any of those expenses when those items are taking place.
And let me just say this. This is what happens when you do a CEA with yourself. You can argue with yourself all day long. I see no needs to do CEA in light of the court case. So if we're going to continue to talk about the CEAs and then come to the table and argue with ourselves, makes no sense. Basically, as the court decision said, we are all here under our sworn oath. When we swore in to uphold the laws under the Constitution, the Louisiana Constitution, and the parish charter. We didn't say we were going to pick and choose what laws we were going to follow. And that's where we're at here today, talking about what we're going to follow as a CEA, as port, as council. I view us all as one. And that might not be what you like, but that's what it is. And that's what everybody up here swore to when they took the oath of office. All of the laws, as the court said, are to be read in globo. And that's what we should follow. We should not be able to pick and choose what laws we are going to follow when it's convenient for us. So I'm hoping that there will be a new attitude at the port to work with this government as one and not as two. And it is my intention to pull that together as much as possible in the future so we are not here arguing with ourselves.
Mr. Russo, I have a question. Do you feel that we should also do an amendment to get reimbursed for all of the port's expenses, or are we only going to pay the parish for their expenses and they are not to pay the port for any of their expenses
My
incurred?
intention is for you to readjust your attitude as to being port versus council or council versus port.
Well, okay.
Excuse me, it's my understanding that you agreed to go ahead and pay for the 19 budget, that money that was budgeted from the port, the 81?
Correct.
Okay. All right, any more questions?
Sure. How were the percentages here determined? For instance, say for the percentages of services that the port has used, for instance, 15% of the council's time. Who determined those?
Basically, the administration proposed those amounts. In 2017, I've given you that breakdown of what we agreed that was probably the best year or the closest mutual agreement year for 2017. In 2018, in the proposed figures in 2019, they were proposed by the administration and adopted by the board.
It was an arbitrary number.
Got it. All right.
Any other comments? Would you make the amendment to accommodate the invoice for 2019?
The 2019 budget is, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The 2019 budget reflects the 311,000 and the 550,000. The 2020 budget does not reflect that amount. We have not received a breakdown of that amount. The only figure we had was the $131,000 figure, and I provided a breakdown of that for those fees.
We can give you those interagency fees right now so you can prepare the budget amendment for today.
And I think one of the other issues that we had to discuss, I know I discussed it with the parish's administration, was the issue of paying the budgeted fee versus the actual fee and the percentages thereof. In previous years, we have paid based on, or we've agreed to pay based on actual expenditures that the parish had expended out, and we would pay the percentage that the board agreed to for that department versus paying a percentage of the budget. Because, as you know, you can budget $1 million, but only expense out 500, 50% of that. So is the port liable for paying a percentage of the budgeted figure or a percentage of the actual expenditures incurred by that department? I want to make that.
Let me say this, Ms. Riley. We've had this discussion many times with the finance department, with Mr. Matthews in the finance department. We have adjusted our invoices to do actual quarterly, and that's what we have been operating on. So that answer was done last year.
Well, Mr. Russo, actually last year the port had to pay the board. They weren't here, but the board, you were here, and the board ordered the port to pay the budgeted amount. We did not pay the actual. So I wanted to make that clear for this year, for 19 and 20 moving forward.
And we've had that meeting, and we have agreed the invoices reflect actual expenditures.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Blake?
Sure. I think that we need to start logging the time as a board, individual members, how much time your individual assistants are spending on these matters, how much time you're spending on these matters, attorney style, down to the 15-minute increment, to prevent any kind of confusion.
You're confusing it. I don't know anybody up here that's going to do that. we have to understand what our role is here. We rely on our finance department. If you want to do your 15-second or 15-minute timesheet, that's fine. But I don't know if anybody else here is going to do it.
All right.
Any other comments?
This
Tom,
is for
is that
20.
19 or 20?
No, this is 20's budget.
20.
That's 2020.
I got it.
Okay. Budgeted amount.
I have a question. I'm looking at the 2019 budget you have for 311,102. But the council's budget was 861. So why are those two numbers different?
Right below the 311 is the 550 for the fire and ambulance. In my budget, we broke those two apart, and in the parish's government, they just recorded as one revenue.
There's two lines.
Yes.
So if you could prepare those amendments, we'll be glad to entertain them now.
I'm working on it.
Thank you.
We'll take a 3-minute recess. At ease. Can we come back to this item?
You want to come back to the amendment? Okay, that's fine.
Come back. Let's move on. Come back.
Okay.
Let me get the paperwork in.
Well, that concludes the financial and related services section, and we can flip to page 3, which covers the operating services and supplies for the general department. Again, I'll only go over the major changes. If y'all have any questions about the detailed line items in the operating services and supplies, we can go over that. We have requested an increase in the operating services conferences and meetings. We previously did not have a budget in 2019 for that. We are looking in 2020 to basically kind of pull those expenses out, and we can show where it's more group-related conferences and trainings and meetings versus we have a line item called employee expense, and it has training and conferences on that line item, and that one is going to be focused more towards the individual level and employee training. So that's why we've we've moved some money over into that section. That's the only major change on page 3. If you want to change to page 4, if there aren't any questions.
Buildings lease.
Buildings lease.
Yes.
We're on page 4.
Mr. Kanovich had a question on page 3 regarding the rents and leases building, which is about $90,000 for 2020. And yes, that includes the Popich building, and we also lease a piece of property here. Yeah, with the parish government. On page 4, we have increased our budget for legal support. We increased that due to the port development. Basically, we are getting more into, well, we're getting closer to hopefully breaking ground in 2020 and moving forward with a strategic plan. So if we've appropriated some funding for legal issues pertaining to that. That's, any questions on that?
Since we are getting ready to execute the lease, do you see any legal problems?
I don't see any, well, if y'all want to speak on that.
No, we don't see any. We don't see any legal problems. You just budget and plan for them. That's all.
And since the Port Parish case has been resolved, in my mind, do you see us increasing revenues, expenditures other than that? We spent probably $50,000 on that.
I'm sorry, on what specifically you're asking?
The port.
Just the
versus
attorney fees?
council. Yeah, the attorney's fees.
Well, that all depends on if the board decides for an appeal. I mean, obviously, there's going to be some expenses on that side. But just outside of standard acquisitions, I think you'll see some expense increases on the acquisition side. That's probably going to be the main thing.
And the reason I ask that, I mean, because if I go down the line, I see 120, 175, 125,000, 150,000, quite a number of high-end increases to probably over $500,000 in these line items.
Which one specifically are you looking at, sir?
Legal support, professionals general, professional services study, professional services.
Well, those aren't $125,000 increases. Those we kept the same. Like, we did do a $110,000 increase from 2019 to 2020 on the professional service general, and that is contributed to a lot of grants that we're looking into other than port security grants. So we have some plans on the professional service side to get, and like I say, I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the legal as well, as far as moving forward and developing the port. You know, we don't have a legal, we don't have an attorney or a team or a department in-house, and you know, moving forward in development within the port and doing different projects, legal review of those would be essential.
So we see those par for the course on professional services. As the port expands, obviously, there's going to be certain expenses that expand as we do have a small staff and we have different contracts here or there. And so as more work is needed to be done, we're going to use those services. So it's just pretty much a standard par for the course increase as port operations and procedures increase.
And for the professional services, the study, we did not use that much of the budget this year, but I know there are some plans for rail study. So that's why we did not decrease that. We left it at the 125.
Finish, Mr. Rousseau?
Yep.
Mr. Blank?
Yeah, could there be cost savings if we have an in-house attorney?
We're constantly looking at that, the difference in having a contract or in-house. That's something we're continually looking at. We'll probably reach a point where we'll probably say, okay, this is too much. Let's bring somebody in-house. We are interviewing some folks right now that can assist in that. So we are going down that road.
I'll say one thing to that. And in principle, obviously, as the port grows, we're going to have to hire more staff in different areas, obviously legal, engineering, operations, et cetera, et cetera. Our biggest struggle moving forward is to attract the right people for those positions at the salaries that now we can bring them in. And frankly, they just won't do for a lot of the certain people at a certain level that comparative to other ports, especially in the Gulf Coast. So one thing that we're going to have to look at as a staff and as a board is looking at the standards of salaries at other ports within the Gulf region and be able to set those salaries and those standards through civil service, obviously, so that we can attract and hire qualified people to work at the port. So that's something that we together are going to have to look at and work together on.
Thank you. Could we revert back to page 2, please?
Yes.
We have the letter.
Read them.
Yes, please.
Amendment to 445 Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District 490, Plaquemines Port, 2460 General Department, 576.005 Interagency Service Charge, an increase of $202,490.93 for a new total of $306,049.93. Line item number 2 will be to 576.006 Interagency Fire and Ambulance for an increase of $582,886 for a new total of $582,866.80.
I offer.
Second.
Second by Mr. Roussel. Any questions from the table? Sheen is open. Passes 6-2. 7-2, I'm sorry, 7-2. All right, next item, please.
Okay, we were on page 4. Are there any more questions on page 4?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Looking at our expenses, I know Trident invoices, we have a lot of invoices and the fees are kind of high. Where is that at?
That is on line item Port Professional Implementation Program, Port Professional Services Port Implementation Program. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the bottom on page 4. There was in 2018, our expenditures was $96,380. In 2019, we budgeted $150 and this budget is as of August 31st. We had $93,943, and in 2020, we budgeted $150,000 as well. There was no increase or decrease to that amount.
Newberry, you finished? Newberry?
That's it. Are you-
Next item, please.
Okay, next page, page 5. We really didn't have any significant increases to the rest of the supplies, the operating supplies budget. If there are any questions, we had a total increase of $208,000, which was about a 15.9% increase in that budget.
Next.
Next page, page 6. We had no major increases to that budget, the capital outlay budget from 2019 to 2020. Page 7, this brings us into the rescue boat department. So it will start over with the professional services expenses. Again, personal services expenses section. Overall, we had a $62,000 increase, and that was mainly due to the budgeting of merit increases. Next section, financial and related services. I'm sorry,
The merit increase is budgeted at what percentage?
3%, 4%, 4%.
4%?
We budget for 4, just in the chance that that individual employee earns a 4, that way it's in the budget. We can adjust them to actual once we find out what.
That's the maximum.
That's the maximum is 4.
So what percentage of the employees got 4 last year?
I would have to check that. I don't know.
I mean, the reason I ask that is because we normally have a 3% increase on merit, and I was curious to see how many employees, after being evaluated, actually get 4.
Yeah, we'll just get back to you, but in any case, worst case scenario, if everybody got a 4, that's what we budgeted, but every year we anticipate obviously it's going to be less than that, so.
Well, never mind.
Next, please.
Okay. Financial and related services, that's the group health insurance and liability insurance for the vessels, for the rescue boats, and that total department had a overall increase of $10,451. If there's any questions on that section. Our next section, towards the bottom quarter of the page, operating services and supplies. We did not have any major changes there on the rest of page 7. Could turn to page 8. We did have a major change for the maintenance on the barge relocation. We have budgeted $100,000 for that, and that is depending upon the port's need to relocate its barge at the Belle Chase dock due to the government's water intake project, if you have any questions on that. And that does include the engineering, and I'll let Donald speak.
I don't need that. Y'all probably can hear me. I speak loud. For the record. We budgeted this monies in anticipation of moving the barge at Belle Chase Dock. as per PPG's water plant intake project. Whether we move it 12 feet or 20 feet, whatever it needs to be, we have to move all utilities, which is 480-volt power, water, gangways, cranes to remove the spuds, put the spuds back in. So there's a lot, again, whether it's 5 feet or 50 feet, the costs are about the same. So that's what that money's budgeted for. The last time I spoke with Ken, he couldn't give me exact time frame or a number when this was going to happen. I see it's moving along, but we don't have an update.
Roussel?
Do you anticipate that it's going to have to be moved?
We've been told for almost 2 years now that we definitely had to move it. Originally, it was move it all the way out. In the last 8 months, it's been 10 feet, 12 feet, and numbers, figures like that, but still no definitive, exactly where.
Who makes that call?
That's part of the engineering project for the new raw water intake. So in order to put the new raw water intake in, they originally designed it where they were going to move the port barge completely out of there, and they would have to find a new spot on the river. We went in, spoke with the engineering firm, told them that wasn't acceptable, and we decided we could compromise if the port could move their barge, and I think it's 12 feet now. The new raw water intake will go in right next to the current intake.
So it'll be on the same piece of property, but just 12 feet over?
Correct.
And it won't encroach on anybody else's property?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Mr. Kanovich?
Yeah, see, you had budgeted 12.5 for rental dock fees. You only paid 69. Have you been paying the parish dock fees since we own the property now?
There is no lease in place for the Belchase dock with the parish. In the 66 that was previous paid was the expense for the lease that was with the PVOC company.
Mr. Blank?
Rennie, could you draw something up as soon as you get a chance, please? Thank you.
Any comments? Next, please.
I think that concludes all the issues on, or the changes on page 8. Turn to page 9. There was no major changes there, increases or decreases, unless you have some questions on those details.
Next.
Next, page 10. Again, no major changes to the capital outlay and debt services budget. Overall increase of 15,000. If there's any questions on that.
Do we pay the Coast Guard any rent?
No, we don't. We have a CEA with the Coast Guard for the Venice dock.
Next item.
MOU, I'm sorry, not a CEA, an MOU. Page 11 is the aviation budget for the helicopter that the port currently is liable for half of the expenses. This budget has been decreased. The current CEA that we have in place with the Plaquemines Parish Sheriff's Office is to expire on December the 31st. Due to the port and the sheriff's office being on two different budget cycles, the parish sheriff's office budget ends mid-year in June. The port has agreed to extend paying that 50% of expense. Oh, I'm sorry, we're still in discussions, but we budgeted for the first 6 months, and we are going to go back to the table with the sheriff's office to talk about the 50% share of the helicopter. The port recently was rewarded some port security grants that we feel we can utilize some of that equipment a little bit better than what we are currently doing. Yes, a drone that we're receiving. Are there any questions on that?
Next item.
Page 12. This is the land acquisition budget, we call. This reflects the VG option revenue, which is different revenue than, or different funding money than what Mr. Russo asked about earlier. There is the advance rent payments, and then there's the option revenue. So this budget, this division and department reflects the option revenue. And it also reflects some expenses that we basically would use those type of funding, that funding for regarding the campus there.
Russell?
Yeah, this is another $285,000 of legal fees and professional service fees, yet we only spent $70,000. So, I mean, I don't know why we budget so much, because the history has not shown that 18 was only 68,000, 19 is 70,000, and we keep budgeting 285,000.
Right, and in 18, there was also some additional expenses that were incurred there. If there's any additional property, again, forecasting out.
Any other comments?
Is that to buy land?
Right. And we try to focus that on the on that site in the complex there versus general, maybe I guess you can say projects we can't really fit in that box.
But to clarify, that is legal support and professional services. It's not actually land acquisition. This is for legal support and professional services.
Pertaining to land acquisitions, yes. If we are doing research, if, like we have a budget for land appraisal, if we are doing research and incur costs regarding that campus, that site, that development, then we would use this department in this budget to separate them out.
So we didn't we pass an ordinance that you have to have?
Two appraisals, yes, ma'am.
Come out of this.
Next, please.
Okay, page 13. This begins the Port Security Grant Program. We recently gave this its own division because we had started receiving a lot of different funding, and we got approved for a couple of different projects. So I thought it was best that we kind of separate this out so you can clearly see the grant expenses and revenues coming in. So this one, the cybersecurity, this was a 2019 grant, and there is no budget for 2020. Page 14. This one is also a 2018 budget. 2019 project. We did not get to expending those funds, so you will see it appear in the 2020 budget so that we can complete that project.
What would the project have?
That one was for a security barge. Page 15, security mobile trailer. We received a grant for that as well. Same thing happened with that. We were unable to get that project completed by the end of this year, so it's rolling over into 2020's budget. Next page, page 16. This is a new grant for 2020, and it is for the MSOC security system. It's basically to go in and enhance our security system, and we were awarded that in 2020. So you see that, those details. Next budget, next grant, page 17 is for a backhaul network. Again, port security grant. Awarded for 2020. Page 18, GIS acquisition and implementation. We were awarded that for 2020 as well.
You need an employee?
Page 19,
Could you explain
I'm sorry.
a bit about that grant in particular?
the GIS acquisition and implementation grant. Yeah.
This is a grant that Port of New Orleans, St. Bernard, and all of us have put in for. It it goes from A to Z, from the accounting side of the port to tracking ships in the river, like aircraft in the air. It's got a broad spectrum of what you can do with the project. Where we're learning about it as we speak, it's FEMA grant monies. The reason why some of these projects, previous projects, have not been completed because FEMA has not really released the funds. So we're not going to endure any cost until we know the funds are truly released. They've been approved. We've got the grant. But the difference in that is you got a 3-year time frame to spend it, and you don't want to start incurring cost until you actually have the monies that you can go grab.
Thanks.
Page 19 is also a port security grant, and it is for Seaburn. And that's also a port security grant. Page 20 is a port security grant for a drone. And the details are set forth. There's no questions. Page 21 is our financial administration general finance budget. This is where you would see most of the non-monetary budgetary line items such as depreciation, other post-employment benefits, expenses that are to be recorded. There is an amendment placed in your folders for this budget. We have to do an adjustment to our asset reclassification. Two line items to asset reclassification for the general capital outlay and also an amendment for the asset reclassification for grants. They were put in as whole amounts based on the awarded amounts instead of just the equipment. So we need to adjust those to reflect just equipment costs to reclassify that asset. You will also see in the capital outlay and debt service, towards the bottom of a page, you will see an expense for the $138,000 in pilot revenue sharing. So that will basically eliminate the revenue that was previously recorded. Again, I know we have talked about this with the board as far as the pilot payment and how the port is distributing that or being able to have access or rights or have the ability to spend those funds. So I know previously we talked about earlier this afternoon the revenue that comes in and how it's calculated. So there is a line item that will also expense that and basically wash that revenue out. And that pilot payment is placed on the port's financial statements again as a liability because we do not have the express rights to expend those funds. So we do have an amendment for the asset reclassification for this section. You ready? 445, Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District, 515, Financial Administration, 2500, General Finance. Line item 569.001, Asset Reclassification General. Because it is a negative number, we're going to increase it by $144,500 for a new total of a negative $115,000. I'm sorry. Item number 2, 569.125, Asset Reclassification Grant. We're going to increase that line item by $351,930 for a new total of a negative $813,027.
I offer the second.
Second.
Second by Councilman Newberry. Questions from the table? Scene is open. Passes 8, 1 abstention. Oh, he's out? Okay, Mr. Good is out, absent, sorry. Councilman Good is absent. Next, please.
Okay, that concludes everything on page 21. Almost done. Page 22 begins the capital improvement budgets, the 5-year capital improvement budgets. We currently have a culvert replacement project. There will be some funding rolled over from that. We have not extinguished that budget. But we have not made any changes for 2020. We did move 20,000 from the capital outlay portion to the maintenance portion, because I think we have done a good deal on replacing those. Now we just are maintaining those culvert replacements on the port property. But no additional funding. We just had a movement of from capital to operating services. Page 23 is the B3 relocation project. That project is ongoing. There has not been any increases or decreases to that budget as well. That one will roll over. Questions, Mr. Rizzo?
Yes, what is the status of the project?
Status of the project is still in the permitting process. We've consistently reached out to the Corps. They provided us comments. We responded to those comments. They had some additional questions, and so currently it's with our permitting team and our geotech team as we try to fix the issues that the Corps has with the permit. And then once we resubmit it, it'll take 4 to 6 weeks for final determination. So we're in that process right now.
And once that is completed, will VG continue or restart their advance rent payments?
Yes.
And do we know what the actual rent payments will be once they execute the lease?
I do not have that number, no, sir.
But there is a number established?
I don't believe we had an exact number, but I'll check. You know, with the ground lease, I'll check that number for you.
And this is to move them two docks?
The B3 is to move port ship services over to the property that we own in the B3 process. Then the B3 would be used by Venture Global. That's the last piece that they need. It's also the last obligation that we have to them. Our major delays have simply been a lot of the questions coming back and forth from the Corps, not to mention the historic flooding, which essentially delayed us, I would say, almost a year in the process. But we're moving forward. As you'll see, tomorrow we have an introduction for a CEA with Port Ship Services and Bear LLC to completely finalize an understanding of what is going on. We did that congruent with the permit process. So everything's kind of heading together at the same time.
We'll be renting them the property where we're going to build the dock on?
For the time being, it'll be for a nominal amount and with the land swap while they're still operating. But once the development of the new site is done, they'll move into that, and then everybody's be clean.
They own the property where they at?
They do own the property where they are. Once we have the permit, there'll be a land swap. And all those details are in the CEA that we provided to Mr. Barthélemy for introduction for tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Councilman Newberry?
Oh, yeah, this project, when did this came to light? A year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Oh, gosh. So I've been here 2.5 years. So it's probably been about that long as that issue. It took a while to first develop the permit application. That takes about 6 months to get done. We did that. The Corps had the item and, for lack of a better term, did not move forward with it for almost 9 months. And we had to get with the colonel and his chief of staff to have the process move forward, particularly with the 404 and 408 permits, and make sure the left hand and the right hand knew what they were doing, for lack of a better phrase. Once we were able to get that going, we had historic flooding. So that caused another delay. And now they've come back multiple times with additional questions. So it's in our hands right now to give back to them to rectify the issues that they have based on the information that our permitting team has provided them, and also the geotech team. So we're working out those kinks again now, and it's anticipated, working with Albert Terry and their team, that once we have those kinks worked out, it's a 4 to 6 week process, and we'll have the permit. So it's been basically timetables outside of our control in some of those. So we've tried to be the ones that are waiting on us to respond as best as we can.
Councilman Blank?
Sure. Why couldn't Port Ship have just remained operating there? Everybody there is either a credentialed mariner or holds a TWIC card. It could have saved an incredible amount of time and money.
That's a very important piece of land that Venture Global, within the agreement that we have an obligation to provide to them. And so in doing so, Port Ships, and so in doing so, they want to put a dock there to be able to move a lot of their equipment over that dock to the site. And so we reached out to PSS initially. They completely appreciated our need and Venture Global's need and was willing to work with us. And they have worked with us for the past 2 years, benevolently, if you will. And so that's why we have this agreement ready to go now that you'll see tomorrow. So that's really the reason. It's a contractual obligation, and there's a strategic and financial need by Venture Global to have that piece of property.
Got it. Okay.
Next item, please.
Okay, that concludes page 23. Page 24, this was the B3 Access Property Project. That project has been completed, and there's no budget for 2020. Next, page 25, land acquisition for the tower property. That project has also been completed. There is no budget. Page 26 is a 5-year capital improvement for land acquisition, basically in the industrial complex. This basically appropriates the funds. The port will still have to come to the board for all purchases of property, purchase agreements and board approval. What this basically does is appropriates the funding prior to the purchase agreement. So we don't have to include the budget amendments in the ordinances that are proposed for adoption to purchase the future property. But this is what we're projecting to invest in new property for 2020.
Any questions from the table? Mr. Blank?
I'll pass this on.
All right, next item, please.
Next item, page 27. This is basically the reclassification budget for 5-year capital improvement. The only change we had was the $4.3 million in the land acquisition we just talked about. That concludes the details. If there are any additional questions, if not, it also concludes my budget presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, please. This is it.
That's it. No more amendments.
5-year capital improvement. No, you went into discussion on that. Go ahead, Mr. Rousseau.
On the capital improvement project, I'm looking at the list, and I made a note here. It goes from 2 to 7. Is there a number 1 project that we've left off, or?
The number 1 project was, I can't think. It fell off of, it was more than 5 years. It didn't include, what was it? I can't think. Was it the 4 point? I think it was parcels. It was parcels 1 and 3. We had that one appropriated, 4.7 or 4.4 million, I think. And that one was done, and everything was showing zeros because of the time period. So that's why it skipped the number.
Any more comments from the table? Mr. Director's table? I'd like to make a comment. It's privilege. Go ahead.
I just realized it before you said it. We want to thank the board. We have a lot of new board members here. I think we have 5 or 6 new board members. So appreciate all the work that we've done, obviously, throughout the year, and we continue to do. We're really excited about 2020. Our staff continues to get beefed up, and we continue to work to get better each and every day. And so we really appreciate everyone's time and working with us as we deal with the new board for the next 4 years. So thank you.
I personally want to thank my colleagues for today. In the budget hearing for the port, it was very, very professionally handled by all of us here at the table. And then thank you for your comments, which was taken very seriously, and also your professionalism. And Mr. Sanders, you and your staff for the presentation was done in a professional manner, and I appreciate what y'all have done today. this being my last, first and last budget hearing for Port, I want to say it was a great experience, and I enjoyed working with the board, the Port staff as well as the board on Port activities. So,
If I may, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'd like to recognize Sean Brell for all the hard work that she put into
problem.
this. Thank you.
with that, I entertain a motion to adjourn the budget hearing for Port. Do we have to approve the budget first for the Port? At the meeting, I know, but it's just adjourn, right? Yes. Is there a motion? I'm off on motion. Second? Second by Mr. Conovich. Machine is open. Passes. 7-2. The meeting's adjourned at 2:32.